Welcome to today's Deep Dive Learner. I want you to just imagine for a second that you are standing in this really serene green park.
Right, just a quiet, grassy
Yeah,
space.
exactly. You've got your feet planted firmly on the ground. Maybe you're walking your dog, surrounded by this nice, quiet, grassy embankment.
Sounds peaceful.
It does. But directly over your head, casting these like massive brutalist shadows, is a totally chaotic, intertwining canopy of concrete pillars.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a multi-level highway, and you can hear the deafening roar of thousands of cars hurtling past you at 70 miles an hour.
That is quite the contrast.
It really is. And, if you were to magically hit fast forward on the world around you from that exact spot, you wouldn't just see, like, buildings go up and come down.
Right.
You'd actually see the exact needs, the anxieties, and even the obsessions of society shifting right before your eyes. It's like the geography itself is a mirror.
It really is. I mean, we have this tendency to think of geography as, static. Like a lake is a lake, a hill is a hill.
Park is a park, yeah.
Exactly. But in a dense urban environment, a piece of land is constantly being rewritten. It's basically a living document that records what a civilization values at any given moment in time.
Yes. Exactly. And that brings us to the mission of today's deep dive. We are looking at one very specific, incredibly layered living document.
They really are.
You curated a just fascinating stack of sources for us today. We've got archival data, engineering classifications, historical timelines, all center around this one place called the Aston Reservoir in Birmingham, England.
Yeah, and when you first look at the data you've gathered, it reads like a pretty straightforward geographical summary.
Right, just dry facts.
Yeah, you have the coordinates, you have a list of alternative names, a specific capacity measurement, and like a timeline of ownership.
Right, but when you actually piece that timeline together, it is an absolutely wild ride.
Oh, totally.
Like, the sources outline a journey from 19th century public health infrastructure straight into, like, 1950s extreme adrenaline sports.
Which is just crazy to think about.
It is. And then finally, to a modern-day green space that has been just completely swallowed by massive highway architecture,
Yeah.
all happening in the exact same spot. So our goal today is to figure out how one single reservoir transforms so dramatically and what that ultimately tells you about the mechanics of how cities evolve.
It's a brilliant case study, really. Because to truly understand what the Aston Reservoir is today, sitting quietly under all that concrete, we really have to look at why it was carved out of the earth in the first place.
Right.
And that begins with the absolute most fundamental human requirement there is, which is clean drinking water.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we rewind to the 19th century, your sources show this reservoir was originally built by a private entity, right? The Birmingham Waterworks Company.
That's right. Situated in the parish of Aston.
Yeah. And it explicitly says they were extracting drinking water from the River Tame.
Yeah.
But then there is this very specific pivot in the text. January 1st, 1876. On that exact New Year's Day, the entire operation is purchased by the Birmingham Corporation Water Department.
Right. And that transition from a private, profit-driven company to a public municipal corporation, that is a monumental shift in how the city functioned.
I was thinking about this, and the best analogy I could come up with for the modern day is, imagine if a city today suddenly realized that internet access was so critical to physical survival that they forcibly bought out a massive private telecom giant.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like they just walked in and said, we're taking over the broadband network because our citizens literally cannot survive without it. We can't leave this in private hands.
Yep.
Taking over a massive private water company in 1876 feels like that extreme level of municipal intervention. You are securing a vital resource for the public trust.
What's fascinating here is the broader context of what was actually happening in Birmingham right at that moment.
Yeah.
You were looking at the absolute peak of the Industrial Revolution.
Oh.
Birmingham was known as the workshop of the world. So you have this explosion of factories, metalworking, manufacturing.
Constant growth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And because of that, urban populations are skyrocketing. People are flocking from the countryside into the city for work. And the existing infrastructure is just buckling under the sheer weight of this massive influx of human beings.
Which, okay, that brings up a huge question for me.
Sir.
The text explicitly says the original private company was extracting drinking water from the River Tame.
Yes.
But wait a minute. We are talking about the 19th century industrial boom in Birmingham. You've got factories, you've got mills, you've got this unprecedented, unregulated urban density.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Yeah, I am pushing back hard on the idea that this was a safe setup. What on earth was the water quality of the River Tame actually like back then?
What?
Because the idea of drinking straight out of a river flowing right through an industrial powerhouse, I mean, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
And you are entirely right to push back on that. It was a recipe for disaster.
I knew.
And that exact tension is the why behind that January 1st, 1876 purchase. You have to remember the horrific realities of 19th century waterborne diseases.
Right, like cholera.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are talking about devastating outbreaks of cholera and typhoid that just routinely swept through Victorian cities.
Terrifying.
It was. And early on, private water companies often treated water purely as a commodity. They provided it intermittently, like sometimes only for a few hours a day.
Wow, really? Only a few hours?
Yeah. And often without the rigorous, large-scale filtration standards that a massive city requires to prevent an epidemic.
So they were selling water to make a profit, not necessarily to keep the city healthy.
Precisely. The motivation was financial return for shareholders, not universal public health. The water from the River Tame would have been increasingly compromised by industrial runoff and human waste as the city expanded upstream.
Oh, that's grim.
Very. So when a city municipalizes its water, when the Birmingham Corporation Water Department steps in and buys the Aston Reservoir, it's a massive philosophical shift.
Right.
It is the city acknowledging that providing clean, filtered water isn't just a business opportunity. It is baseline public health infrastructure. It is about the sheer survival of the urban workforce.
It's the moment the city government basically says, we have to own the tap or we aren't going to have a city left.
Exactly. They are establishing a public water department to actively sustain that growing population. The Aston Reservoir was no longer just a private asset sitting on a ledger. It became a public lifeline.
Okay, so now that the city owned this massive public health asset, the immediate problem became, how do you safely contain that much water right next to a dense residential parish without accidentally washing everyone away?
That's the big engineering challenge, yes.
Right. So to understand how this reservoir shaped the area, we have to look at its sheer physical scale.
And the engineering required to build and maintain a reservoir of this era is staggering, especially considering the tools they had available.
Yeah, your source material gives us some hard numbers to work with here. It says the Aston Reservoir sits in a bend of the river, and it has a capacity of 111,400 cubic meters.
Right.
Or 145,700 cubic yards. Now, let's try to actually visualize 111,400 cubic meters.
It's a lot.
It's huge. Imagine a massive big box IKEA warehouse, right? The kind that takes up an entire city block.
Okay, yeah.
Now imagine sealing the doors and filling that entire warehouse, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, entirely with water.
That's terrifying.
It is. It is a staggering volume to just have sitting in the middle of a neighborhood.
It is an immense physical presence in the landscape. And remember, water is incredibly heavy.
Right.
1 cubic meter of water weighs exactly 1 metric ton. So you are talking about over 111,000 tons of water that aggressively wants to go somewhere.
Which leads to the part of the text that really made me pause. It says all of this water, this entire flooded IKEA warehouse, is held back by an earth-fill dam.
Ah, yes.
And I have to be honest, earth-fill dam sounds terrifyingly flimsy.
It does sound a bit rudimentary.
It sounds like what a kid builds at the beach. Is a wall of packed dirt really enough to safely hold back what the Environment Agency, and as recently as November 2020, mind you, still officially classifies as a large raised reservoir?
I completely understand why the term earthfill sounds like a precarious pile of loose soil. But I can assure you, the engineering is incredibly sophisticated.
Okay, I'm listening.
When we talk about an earth-fill dam holding back a large raised reservoir, we are talking about a meticulously designed, multi-layered structure that utilizes sheer mass and specialized materials.
So it's not just Victorian laborers with shovels piling up mud until water stops flowing.
Not at all. Earth-fill dams rely on very specific internal zoning. You engineer a core.
Okay.
In Victorian times, they use a technique called puddling.
Puddling?
Yeah, they would create a central core of highly impermeable clay. Laborers and sometimes animals would literally stomp and knead wet clay until all the air bubbles were forced out.
We literally stomping on it.
Literally stomping on it. This creates a watertight seal that actually stops the water from seeping through.
Okay, so the clay stops the leak. But what stops the sheer force of the water from just pushing the clay over? I mean, 111,000 tons of water.
That is where the rest of the earth fill comes in. Surrounding that watertight clay core, you have layers of increasingly coarse, heavy materials,
Like what?
sands, gravels, dense rocks. These outer layers provide the massive structural weight needed to push back against the hydrostatic pressure of the reservoir.
Ah, hydrostatic pressure. I hear that term a lot in these engineering documents, but let's clarify that for the listener. What are we actually talking about in practice?
Hydrostatic pressure essentially means that the water at the bottom of the reservoir is pushing outward with exponentially more force than the water at the top.
Because of the weight above it.
Exactly. The deeper you go, the heavier the water above it is. So the bottom of the dam is constantly under immense outward pushing force, essentially trying to blow out the base of the structure.
Okay, that makes sense.
The sheer compacted weight of the earth-filled dam is designed to counteract that exact outward force.
So the sheer weight of the engineered earth is locked in a permanent wrestling match with the sheer weight of the water.
Exactly. And your sources note that the reservoir sits at a bend of the river.
Right, too.
That's a crucial geographical detail that really speaks to the ingenuity of the engineers. A bend in a river is a natural catch point.
Oh, I see.
From a design standpoint, utilizing the natural topography, nestling the reservoir into that curve, allows you to maximize the amount of water you can hold while minimizing the length of the artificial dam you have to build to close it off.
Ah, so you do less work for more water.
Precisely. It's working in tandem with the landscape, not just imposing brute force upon it.
Okay, so we have this massive, quiet, meticulously engineered pool of essential drinking water, a solemn monument to Victorian public health and survival.
Indeed.
But here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh yes, the pivot.
Because if you keep reading the timeline in your sources, the narrative takes this incredibly sharp, almost bizarre left turn.
Reached the mid-century transition.
Yes. As the decades roll on, this crucial survival infrastructure starts having what looks like a total identity crisis.
It really does.
The text notes, it became known by multiple names over the years. We've got Salford Lake, Salford Park Pool, and Salford Bridge Reservoir.
Right.
It transitions completely away from being a drinking water source and becomes a public boating lake. But the absolute peak of this era is in the 1950s.
The newsreels.
The newsreels. The sources linked to these old black and white British Pathé newsreels, specifically from the year 1952. And what are they doing on this Victorian drinking water reservoir?
It's fantastic.
Speedboat racing, outboard engine meetings, giant crowds lining the earth-filled dam enjoying extreme water sport.
And is a phenomenal sensory contrast when you picture it.
It's amazing. You swap out the quiet, utilitarian solemnity of a Victorian waterworks for the absolute deafening roar of 1950s hydroplane engines.
Right.
You've got these little wooden boats kicking up, massive wakes, the smell of engine exhaust in the air, and just thousands of people cheering. It is sheer spectacle.
It is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this transition from utility to adrenaline tells you everything you need to know about post-industrial cultural shifts.
How so? Like, what sparks that specific leap?
Well, think about the progression of urban society.
Mhm.
In the 1870s, the city's primary overarching concern is basic survival.
All right, getting clean water to factory workers so the city doesn't collapse from disease.
Exactly. But by the 1950s, the infrastructure and the economy have matured significantly. You have the post-World War II boom. You have the solidification of the weekend as a protected concept.
Oh, right. Free time.
Suddenly, the working class has disposable time and disposable income.
And crucially, this is Birmingham. This is the heart of the British motor industry, right?
Exactly.
You've got massive car factories nearby. These people know engines.
Yes. You have a massive population of highly skilled, mechanically minded workers. The 1950s were an era defined by a fascination with speed, mechanics, and motorized leisure.
That makes perfect sense.
And a large, flat body of water inside city limits is a rare and highly valuable asset. Once the Aston Reservoir was no longer the sole lifeline for drinking water, because the city had built larger, more modern reservoirs further out, it became an urban playground.
It's like the ultimate peacetime flex.
Yeah.
Like, we used to need this muddy pool just to not die of cholera, and now we're literally strapping V8 engines to wooden planks and racing them across it for fun.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
Post-industrial society begins repurposing its obsolete or secondary survival infrastructure for public leisure. Putting roaring speedboats on a 19th century reservoir is the ultimate expression of mid-century optimism.
But, as your source text makes very clear, the roaring speedboats didn't last forever.
No, they didn't.
In fact, boating is no longer allowed at all today.
Which brings us to its most recent identity shift.
So what does this all mean for the reservoir today? The conversation in the text shifts to its current state. Today, The area around the water is Salford Park.
Right.
But the defining detail, the thing that utterly dictates its modern existence, is what surrounds it.
Or rather, what's above it.
Exactly. The text explicitly states that the reservoir sits immediately adjacent to the Aston Expressway, the M6 motorway, and the Gravelly Hill interchange.
Right.
Which is famously, or perhaps infamously, known as Spaghetti Junction.
Yes, one of the most complex, massive, and visually imposing pieces of highway infrastructure in the entire United Kingdom.
I really want to paint this picture for you, the listener, because the juxtaposition is jarring. Imagine you are standing in this serene green space in Salford Park.
Okay.
You're walking alongside an earth-filled dam that was painstakingly stomped and compacted by Victorian laborers in the 1800s.
Right.
And directly over your head, casting these permanent, massive shadows, is a chaotic, multi-level canopy of concrete pillars holding up highways with thousands of cars hurtling past.
It's a crazy image.
The scale of the concrete completely swallows the park. And I have to ask about the engineering here. I'd assume building a massive multi-lane highway directly over a Victorian reservoir was a huge headache. Wouldn't the constant vibrations and sheer weight of the M6 motorway damage a 150-year-old earth-filled dam?
You would certainly think so, but it actually comes down to the sheer density of that Victorian clay core we talked about earlier.
The stomped clay.
Yeah, the puddling. Because it was engineered with such immense compacted mass to hold back 111,000 tons of water, it is incredibly resilient to ground-level vibration.
Oh, wow.
The pillars of the highway are sunk deep into the bedrock around it, but the reservoir itself remains remarkably stable. What this really speaks to is the relentless mechanism of urban layering.
Urban layering.
Yeah. Cities don't erase their history. They literally build their future directly on top of it.
I've heard urban planners describe cities as lazy rivers of capital. Developers and highway planners always take the path of least resistance.
That is the perfect analogy for what happened here. In the 19th century, waterways and reservoirs were the absolute focal points of civil engineering. They were the pride of a growing city.
Right.
But by the late 20th century, the automobile became the undisputed king of urban planning. The Gravelly Hill Interchange Spaghetti Junction was designed to handle the massive, unprecedented flow of national commercial traffic.
And when you are routing massive motorways through a dense, historic city like Birmingham, you are looking for blank space on a map.
Exactly.
It is infinitely cheaper and politically easier to drive massive concrete pillars through an existing public park and reservoir than it is to buy up and demolish 500 historic homes.
Precisely. The path of least resistance.
Yeah.
The reservoir didn't move, but the city's entire priority system shifted around it.
Yeah.
What was once the absolute focal point of the parish of Aston, the literal wellspring of public health, and later the vibrant, noisy center of mid-century leisure, has now been relegated to a quiet, almost forgotten background feature.
It's just wild to think about.
It is nestled beneath the soaring concrete arches of the M6. The sheer scale of the automotive highway dwarfs the scale of the water.
It really is wild when you zoom out and look at the whole life cycle we've covered today. From extracting drinking water from the polluted River Tame in 1876 just to survive,
Yeah.
to the roaring, exhaust fume-filled hydroplane races captured on black and white film in 1952, to a peaceful, slightly forgotten modern-day park sitting quietly in the oppressive shadow of Spaghetti Junction.
It is a profound evolution, and it highlights how resilient these geographic spaces have to be to survive the changing eras of a city.
And for you listening, I think the real takeaway here is that every single city has these layered spaces.
Absolutely.
You might be walking your dog right now in a local park. Maybe you're even walking across an earth-filled dam, while thousands of commuters drive over your head on a modern expressway. And absolutely none of you, not the commuters, not the dog walkers, are aware of the 19th century public health crises or the 1950s adrenaline sports bury right beneath your feet.
It's a wonderful reminder to look closer at the mechanisms of our own surroundings. But actually, looking at the source material you provided, there's one final detail buried at the bottom that I find incredibly compelling.
Oh, what stands out to you?
Well, at the very bottom of the text, there's a categorized list of other municipal reservoirs scattered across Birmingham.
Okay.
It mentions places like Brookvale, Franklin, Lifford, and Whitten Lakes. But there is one specific entry that immediately caught my eye. It lists the Perry Barr Reservoir, and right next to it, in parentheses, it simply says the word covered.
Wait, covered, like fully enclosed under a roof?
Yes, an underground, fully sealed body of water.
Whoa.
And this raises a truly fascinating question. We've just spent all this time uncovering the vibrant, chaotic, multi-layered history of the Aston Reservoir. We talked about the fight for water rights, the massive crowds watching speedboats, the concrete highway pillars being driven into the earth, and all of that rich, observable history happened simply because the Aston Reservoir is sitting out in the open, forced to interact with the changing city above it.
Right, it was a blank canvas for whatever the city wanted to do with it.
Exactly. So if a piece of water sitting out in the open accumulates that much wild history, what hidden histories, what forgotten Victorian engineering or strange pastimes are lurking inside the covered reservoirs of the city?
Oh, wow.
What happens to a massive piece of urban geography when you put a concrete lid on it and completely seal it off in the dark for a century?
That is an incredibly eerie and fascinating thought to leave on. Just massive, dark, silent chambers of water sitting underneath the streets of the city,
Yep.
completely untouched by the 1950s hydroplanes or the modern highways, just waiting in the dark. Well, we will have to leave that mystery for you, the listener, to explore on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you're standing in one spot in your own city, just remember to look around, look up at the highways, look down at the ground, and keep questioning the hidden history of your own surroundings.